I hated the church. I hated the church. I woke up one day, after being told all these, don't ask questions, just have faith. I woke up one day and I thought, you know what? If they're trying to hide stuff from me, then it's not true. And I lost my testimony. And I wrote a letter to the stake president and I said, please take my name off church records. And a few weeks later, I got a letter that I've been excommunicated. And that made me very angry. And that's why I became, anti. I spent 26 years doing that. I joined a group called What Do Mormons Really Believe? And I went to go tell them what they really believed. I was one of the most hated people on that website. But I met a guy named Mike. Although we had some really bitter debates in the beginning, became friends over time. And he would say, you're going to come back to the church. And I'd say, I'm never coming back to the church. I'll be your friend. We can have fun. We can chat, but I'm never coming back to the church. In 2009, I had the swine flu, and there was no cure. I was very, very, very ill. So I'm laying on my deathbed. There's a knock on my door, and my son inexplicably lets into my house 2 missionaries. And I told them to get out of my house, and they said, can we give you a blessing? And I said, well, to get you out of my house. And they said, yes. So I got the blessing, and I was immediately healed. I don't mean that I got better over the next couple of days. I mean that in that moment, my sweating stopped, my fever broke. I was able to get out of bed for the first time in days. And I walked them downstairs and said, don't ever come back to my house. I hated the church. In 2014, my wife got a job opportunity, but she was going to have to move to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We were in Dallas. So I called my friend Mike. I called him. I said, Mike, do me a favor. Would you please pray for Susan to get this position? That was a crossroads in my life. I should have said, thank you, Mike. You're a good friend, and hang up the phone. But I'm not that way. I said, however, if the Lord really wants me to be a member of the church, he will send Susan to Utah. Good plan, because there were no openings in Utah that day. The very next day, the person in Utah retired. And the very next day, her paperwork was transferred to Salt Lake, and she was hired immediately without the 2-week vetting. So I called Mike, and I said, you're not going to believe this. Susan's going to Utah. He said, well, you know what you told God. Yeah. I said, I was just joking. He said, God wasn't. It's hard to ignore that miracle. Sometimes God parts the waters. Most of the time, he just whispers. But now and then, he uses a 2-by-4. So that's when I hit my knees. And I said, okay, for 26 years, I've had issues with the church. I've talked to your apologists. I've read your apologetics. Nothing works for me. If this is what you want, that's great, but I need answers, and I haven't gotten answers in 26 years. So I hit my knees, and over the next few weeks, I'd wake up in the middle of the night with an answer to an issue that I had never heard before, but it worked for me. Until I woke up one day in March of 2015, and I had my testimony back. I wasn't talking to anybody about it. I wasn't talking to Mike about it. I really wasn't sharing my feelings and my journey during that month. And I woke up one morning and I had my testimony back, and I called Mike and I bore my testimony, and he truly wept like a child. For 20 years, he had put my name in the temple every week, for 20 years. A couple of weeks later, Susan and I go to Moab. I get a phone call. A woman says, I see you've been on the church website and want information on the church. I said, no. Wasn't me. And she said, you remember the church? I said, let me tell you a story. So I told her my story. After I get done, she's in tears. And she said, I'm at the MTC and I'm having a crisis of faith, going to go home. So while that's all processing, he put me on answering these people that want information on a church. Your name and number came up, so I called you. Thank you for your story. I'm going to go finish my mission.
Wow.
A couple weeks after that, another phone call. Woman says, is this Dusty? I said, yes, it is. And she says, would you please hold for President Uchtdorf? He gets on the phone and he says, my understanding is that you left the church for 26 years and you were an anti and you came back. And I said, that's true. And he said, will you come visit with me? I said, sure. So I go visit with him. He says, I'm going to use your story in General Conference. I said, okay. He says, I'm not going to use your name. I said, that's fine. And in October 2016 General Conference priesthood session, on a talk about Alma and Amulek, he tells my story.
David had not completely forgotten the gospel truth he had once embraced. And like Amalek, David felt the Lord reaching out to him.
In January of 2017, I needed a holster, and I saw a table selling holsters, and so I go over there, and I'm talking to the fellow that's selling the holsters, and he said, you're not from around here. I said, no, I'm not. He says, why are you here? I said, let me tell you a story. He said, wait a second, that talk that Elder Uchtdorf gave was about you? And I said, yep. And he goes, can we chat for a second? And I said, sure. I get done telling my story, and the fellow that had followed us over says, you're from Dallas. I said, yeah. And he said, oh, Cliff? And I said, yep. And he said, you don't remember me, but 8 years ago you had the swine flu and I gave you a blessing.
Wow.
The rest of that story is after his mission, he'd gone inactive. Before the 2016 priesthood session, his bishop said, I've had enough of your inactivity. Here's a ticket to the priesthood session. Go watch it. He goes and watches it. He hears the story, the talk about Alm and Amulek, and it reanimates him, not realizing that it was about somebody he'd given a blessing to 8 years earlier.
Wow, that's amazing.
There's been many more miracles dealing with my cancer, dealing with other stuff, but that's the story of me coming back to the church. I think one of the things that it shows is that it doesn't matter who you are, what you've done. The Lord's very aware of you. The Lord loves you. The Lord loves you as if you were the only person on the earth. All these people in the world, the billions of people in the world, and yet he had time for me. Even when I hated the church and were trying to hurt people in the church. I didn't want to hurt people in the church. I thought I was doing them a favor. But even when at my worst, he loved me. That's insane. You know, it's one thing to say that I believe in God, but I think more importantly, there's nothing you can do that takes you out of Heavenly Father's reach. His arm's going to reach you no matter where you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what you've thought, no matter what you've said. Heavenly Father will always believe in you.